The following is an informational slide deck suggesting incident response to patch MS16087 from Microsoft. This presentation focuses on how to handle patch MS16087 from Microsoft that was issued to fix a vulnerability for remote code execution associated with printer drivers. Patching at its extreme can have pros and cons. There is a choice of weighing functional benefits versus the dysfunction that patches create that need repair. NIST put out a publication in 2013 regarding patch management that noted that patches correct security and functionality problems in software and firmware. It should be noting that patching is a core IT function because it mitigates software vulnerabilities caused by design flaw or evolved threats. It can also improve functionality, new features, so on and so forth. It should be noted that patching is often the only fully effective solution to clear up evolved flaws that have evolved in the software. The CISO will often advise the CTO about vulnerabilities that patches will eliminate at the extreme in a written report or sometimes a meeting. Security advice for the patches outlines what vulnerabilities that patches will eliminate. NIST 853 made suggestions about handling patch management. Before you install a patch in an enterprise environment, you need to assess the potential outcomes of installing versus not installing. Software patches can occasionally cause functionality problems for applications or devices that they communicate with. Therefore, I made some suggestions about how to handle installing patches, and specifically this particular patch. Identify the number of licenses and versions that are production to receive the patch. We need to assess the damage before making the install. Always test the patch in an offline virtual lab, often in a virtual environment. We also want to identify what baselines that the patches will either maintain or filter. We want to assess if the patch were not installed, what's the probability of attack? How many devices could a successful attack impact? What would be the costs and severity of the impact? Would the install material impede productivity? If we remediated the installed patch, what countermeasures? If we chose not to install the patch, what countermeasures could we use to lower the risk or impact of an attack? And if we did install the patch, what workarounds could restore lost functionality post-install? And have we tested those workarounds and do they work? We also want to understand the objectives of the patch, meaning what was it intended to fix? Following two slides outlines the intentions of MS16087, the vulnerability it sought to remove, once the patch is installed, tested in a virtual lab, we want to identify the dysfunction that the patch could cause. We want to identify in the lab how dysfunction can be restored post-install, and there were some guidelines about workarounds that could be applied to this particular patch. When we test workarounds, we want to understand what they're doing, what their capabilities are, what the drawbacks are, and we want to document all that, put it into a report, submit it to senior management that could include change management, and allow them to use it for decision support as they evaluate whether or not to install a patch that could be a problem for the operating environment. I created a 10-step courses of action to deal with this particular patch. 10 steps includes understanding the patch, understanding the vulnerability it sought to eliminate, understanding your production environment, how the patch affects different golden images that are in production, what would be the dysfunction that the patch would cause, what would be the countermeasures and workarounds that could be identified in a virtual lab to solve the problem. We want to multiply all these lab results by the number of machines that could be affected and categorize them by department to determine how each department could be impacted by installing the patch. We want to submit that detailed report again to senior management to help them understand the pros and cons of installing the patch in order to make a decision of whether to install it or wait until a future patch arrives that will not cause any dysfunction in the production environment. I've created 8 recommendations that can be applied to call it incident response to handle this particular patch. 1, we need to understand that patching is an IT function. It's not a security function. The CISO advises the CTO about security aspects of a release patches, and the outcome and the impact of the patches should be fully understood prior to install. NIST SP 840 version 3 supports a defined process to guide success of each patch within the patch management program. We need to assess the impact of the operational dysfunction of the patch by comparing the dysfunction to the asset management database. We want to calculate the math and categorize by the operating platform and the department. How much risk is there by choosing to install or not install the patch? We need to test the patch in a virtual lab with samples of each impacted operating environment and understand and document the results. And we need to identify a restore process if the patch breaks processes for workstation users to print with. This represents a choice of pros or cons to install or not install. All of that information is documented into a detailed, organized report for senior management and change management to discuss, to decide, is it worth installing the patch, or does it create too much dysfunction to the production environment that might warrant factoring that risk into risk tolerance of the enterprise and wait till a future patch arrives to eliminate the dysfunction to the printers. If the install is improved, engage the in-house deployment tool to push the patches, countermeasures, and workarounds to the device to receive the patch. And lastly, very important, monitor the results of the deployment and the functional outcomes post-install. Did it work? What problems did it cause? How many more machines do we need to remediate to enable the users to print? I hope you learned something from this presentation. Thanks for watching.